So
we're
let's go for it.
live on Monday morning, May 15th, 2017, with Dr. Al Muth and Colin Barrows and Cheryl McKinley with Friends of Desert Mountains, talking about different kinds of strands of conservation today, I think is what we said we might set out to do. And Colin wanted to start off with a question or two that might head us in the right direction.
Sure. I don't know that I have a really great question that I can get down into one little bit, but something we talked a little bit or sort of touched on it last time, and we were just talking about it now, that sort of we only get to screw up once when we're talking about conservation, when the developer has forever. And we were in the car driving up here, we were talking about these monument designation, Trump, all that nonsense. And it feels to me like we're fighting these battles. Not only do we not get a chance to screw up, but then we have to go back and fight the same battle over again. And at least I feel like, and maybe you can tell me whether I'm right, that here in the Coachella Valley, someone somewhere along the line somehow seemed to figure out how to do it right in a way that the developers and the conservationists work together. So this sort of greed factor, as Cheryl was talking about, wasn't in the picture. Or we were able to.
Well, with the first Fringe Toad plan, we blundered into it because there was no template. We did it.
Right.
And I'm sure we made mistakes along the way that, in retrospect, those that came after were able to look at our plan and say, that just ain't going to work here. And go on and make corrections, and it morphed into whatever worked for them.
Do you have an example, one of the things you think you got right and one of the things you would have done differently?
I think differently, there was some confusion on accounting for the fees initially. And that eventually got sorted out, but a little more definition on the accounting. There's two schools of thought on whether or not we got the sand source issue correct.
Right.
Dr. Barrows has a contrary opinion. Clearly, he's wrong of the sand transport, but irrespective of which view holds, the sand seems to be getting there, and it's subject to all the whims of rain years, vegetation cover, and all the other sorts of things that we knew would influence sand transport. So maybe we got that one wrong. Maybe we didn't. But it's working. The major thing to come out of the first plan was the realization by the cities, CVAG, the Building Industry Association, that here's something that works. We know what the rules are. We know who to make the check out to. We can just get on with what we do. And as I've said before, seeing what was going on in western Riverside County, there were enough wise folks down in the government and developer community that said, we don't want to go that way. And so that's how the second plan came about.
So was that just luck, or was there sort of did somebody go out and take somebody by the hand and say, look, this is how it needs to happen? Or
the first and the second plan?
Either.
Either?
Yeah.
Well, the first one wasn't luck.
Yeah.
It was the Endangered Species Act.
Right. Well, I mean luck,
and
or the first plan, but I guess when you say that the developers and the CVAG and the cities all came to this realization that it was the right thing to do, or the easy thing to do in the long run, did they come to that realization on their own? Was somebody going to them and saying,
I think they did.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't surprise me if, and this is total speculation on my part, if somebody with enough contact and savvy like Bill Haber
Mm-hmm.
hadn't brought things up to the cities and said, we could be headed down
Mm-hmm.
the warpath again,
Mm-hmm.
and none of us want that.
Mm-hmm.
So how it, what the influence was that brought them around to the light side of the force, if you will, I don't know.
Yeah, that's sort of what I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and whether we just got lucky and the right city manager or whoever was in the right place at the right time, or whether obviously there was a lot of hard work involved. Whether it's that hard work that got it there, or what the
I think. Well, actually, if you chase down Bill Haber,
mm-hmm.
Corky Larson.
Mm-hmm. Corky's on our
Corky was the director of, or she was the county supervisor and the chairperson of the board of supervisors for the first plan.
Mm-hmm.
And she might have had something
Mm-hmm.
to do with it. And also Katie Barrows.
Mm-hmm.
And Katie and Bill are probably the only ones that ever fully understood the entire
Mm-hmm.
30 pounds of the second plan.
30 pounds would be like the annotated version, I think.
Yeah, the short version.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think those folks would be the ones to go to
Mm-hmm.
for the behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Corky's definitely on my list, and Bill, if he can come down here, maybe he's up on the phone or something like that. Let me think about. We have someone, Cheryl.
Well,
here.
I'm thinking about conservation in the past. What influenced you, if anything? I mean, it sounds like you were a scientist doing research on specific things until you came into this job, and you mentioned last time several people who were influential in your life. Thinking about conservation at present, and obviously we're worried about conservation in the future. So if you want to comment on any of that, or on the flow of things and what you think needs to happen, we'd be really ready to listen.
35 years ago, none of us had the least bit of training in conservation.
Mm-hmm.
Conservation biology as a discipline wasn't a thing.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing to note is that the Society for Conservation Biology had its first annual meeting in 1985.
Mm-hmm.
That's the year we signed the conservation plan.
Mm-hmm.
So we were way ahead of the curve, but none of us had been prepared for it. When I got here, I didn't know the difference between a planning commission and Riverside County Board of Supervisors or the Palm Desert Chamber of Commerce.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it was a seat of the pants learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
And 35 years ago, that was pretty much everybody's experience.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a lot to learn, but I know for me, the real driver is a philosophical opinion that species have a right to exist irrespective of their economic value to mankind. Okay, that's the bottom line. That's when you get through all the arguments and all, it comes back down to just that one tenet. You either believe it or you don't. And so that's what was the real fundamental driver for everything that I got involved in. It's just, I think it's just basically wrong not to have a feeling of stewardship over the earth. It's not dominance, it's stewardship.
Mhm.
I think that's what the Bible's term it uses. And yeah, sure we need development. We're here.
Mm-hmm.
We may go away, but we're here. And we just deserve, or we just, in my opinion, need to give something back to preserve what's here.
Mm-hmm.
So those are rambling, sort of
Mhm.
philosophical thoughts as to how
Mm-hmm.
we got involved in. You know, your dad, Cam Barrows. Why did he start to work for the Nature Conservancy? Why did he come down here to work on a new preserve?
Yeah.
That was under assault every day by off-road vehicles and vandals, etc. There had to be a reason other than the money, because he didn't make much money over there. Matter of fact, none of us made much money. Except for maybe Paul.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the short answer is that was the job was available at the time, and he wanted to get back into Southern California. I know that. So, because of me. So that's kind of what that gets back into what I was thinking about. Is that there's sort of this confluence of good fortune where you get the right people in the room, and then how do we
Or make the right people get formed by the circumstances.
Right.
Also, or
Right.
respond in positive. What we think now is positively.
exactly?
That was the stars were aligned, I guess, the right confluence of people. And at that time, the Nature Conservancy had just gotten a grant from the Mellon Foundation for wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve, he was the head of the California Conservancy, then went on to be the director of the National Nature Conservancy. And I'm blanking on his name right now. But he was wise enough to say, oh yeah, that oasis out there is a wetland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They fronted $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So how, that just happened at the time, that at the right time, in the right place, with the right players. And I remember shortly after we finished the Fringe Stove plan, Paul Selzer started working with the developers in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And in a conversation he had one day, said, the players over there, they're all different. We don't have the same kind of players that we had here in the valley. He says, where are the Steve McCormicks? Where are the Johnsons? Where's the Al Muth? We don't have them over there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in retrospect, that was Paul saying, we had a good bunch of people over there that just wanted to get this done. So, luck, the stars aligned, it all worked.
Now, we were talking a little bit about this monument being threatened idea, and I asked Colin if he knew the difference between the congressional act that made Santa Rosa San Jacinto Nation a monument versus the Antiquities Act, the newer.
Mm-hmm.
Are they both liable to be rescinded in the same way, or is it congressional acts and have different implications?
There are, as I understand it, different implications for how you would rescind their existence or whatever. The Antiquities Act is an act of the president.
Mm-hmm.
The congressional designation, I think, is an act of law. So to rescind one, I think it's arguable that the sitting president would be able to rescind that designation, a monument designation by a former president. And I know the boundaries have been adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
Joshua Tree National Park, the Eagle Mountain at landfill, where the mine was, used to be within the boundaries of the national monument. and I don't know how many square miles were removed. But that's different than just unestablishing.
What's the
Yeah,
rescission?
whatever the word is.
Rescission is the
Rescission.
Yes, that's the new word we've had to learn now. Yeah.
Rescission. Rescissionizing.
Yeah.
Rescinding a monument status. But I think to change the congressional designation, it would require whatever the majority vote is in at least the House and most likely the Senate.
Mm-hmm. So Deep Canyon is part of the Santa Rosa and San Jacinto.
Well, we're surrounded by it.
Surrounded by.
UC decided not to become a signatory to the to the plan. I think he does.
Isn't the boundary? I forget.
It goes around us.
It goes around you. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was sort of curious about that because if you look at the boundary, I can't see it in my head right now, but it's not clear whether it comes up to the bottom of the hillside or.
No, it does not include any of the UC
property. Okay.
But as soon as you get outside of our boundaries down here to the north,
right,
it goes right to the toe slope,
right,
which I don't think was ever defined.
Yeah, it gets a little tricky there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was part of the monument, whether you would have been involved in the creation of that, or whether you just would have checked a box and said yes or whatever. But.
Well, the Mountains Conservancy, read Bill Habert, drafted the legislation, and Mary Bono carried it in the House. I think Feinstein might have championed it in the Senate.
Sounds about right.
I was chairing the Mountains Conservancy at the time. So indirectly, I was involved in that. And I did go to Washington to testify before one of the, I think it was a House committee. Yeah, it's probably the House.
What did you say?
It's good.
It has this is why the blah, blah, blah.
It has the support. What you need to say is it has all of the things that a national monument should have. It has scenic values, scientific values, educational values, and economic value to the communities and all that. So you point those things out. But the major point that I wanted to make was it had the support of the local community. And as it turns out, there was a representative of sort of the next level up in the Building Industry Association, whatever their national organization is. And he was there saying the same thing. This has the support of the Building Industry Association.
That sounds like a critical piece.
Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
I think we have focused on conservation people in our interview so far, and not so much the
business side.
Yeah, the other side of the coin, and who are also our friends, and we don't internalize that in the same way.
It's interesting when you think about conservation issues and resolutions in developing countries. And it's always, you have to get the local tribes, the local villages involved and show that it's to their benefit that we do this. A live rhino is far more valuable than the rhino horn for the poacher. It's the same thing. Developers are our villagers, and so world over, everybody's got to have come out of these sorts of deals with some ownership. I think it's the right thing to do. But long term is better than short term.
So how do you make that argument to them?
Which them?
Our villagers here.
Our villagers?
Yeah.
Well, the best argument is that it's going to cost you a lot of money. You may win, you may not win. Mm-hmm. And it's to your economic advantage to resolve this problem and get on with what you do. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, I've never deluded myself into thinking that the Sunrise Corporation ever really was concerned about the lizard.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, Bill Boone. Now, there's one of their advertisements right there on the wall. Let me get it. Yeah. Well, it's been hanging there a while. You can see the dust. But, you know.
Huh. So the Sunrise was the company that was going to develop.
Yeah.
Yeah. The area where the preserve is now.
No. Yeah. It's their big club. It's on Country Club Drive, Country Club and Cook Street, I think. Desert Falls. It's Desert Falls. Mm-hmm. And then right after that, Indian Palms. Yeah. Which is one of the reasons.
And they're building something else there. They're scheduled to build something.
That was one of the reasons Paul told me.
Mm-hmm.
We might win this one, we might not. But this isn't our last project. We don't want to fight this battle.
Do you have a scanned version of that, or?
No, I don't.
Yeah, let's before we leave. We'll
meet an old neighbor.
That's pretty cool.
We were talking also in the way, we got a lot of conversations crammed into 5 minutes about the local community who are living on the mountain. For example, there was somebody trying to build a house, I presume, right above Vista Point, and I don't know who that person was, but they're all gone now. And when I asked around at property committee of the friends, what happened, what I was told was, well, they didn't do their homework, they are trying to build in the middle of a sheep preserve, and that they were reported by a lot of people. Anybody that drove by reported them. To whom? I'm not sure, but they left like overnight. And my impression was that people really are guarding these mountains. There's a lot of local investment in having the mountains stay the way they are. And is that part of our constituency that we would draw on in the future to help protect our monument or to help protect our valley from further invasion or whatever? And how did they come to be, and how do you nurture that and harness it?
I think you harness it through ownership. If they feel that this is where I live. I'm in the middle of a place that should be and can be preserved for all time. You probably don't move up to Pinion Crest or Pinion Flat and hope that it's going to develop into another big city. You move there for a reason. It's not convenient. Driving up and down Highway 74 every day is just a pain. And there's no stores up there. There's no schools up there. If you don't homeschool your kids, you got to drive them down the mountain every day, take them to the Palm Springs School District. Because of bizarre quirks, that's in the Palm Springs School District. You drive through Palm Desert, with great schools, Rancho Mirage in front of you over there. So I think the people are there for a reason. It's not a cheap community. Pinion Flat is less expensive than Pinion Crest or Royal Carrizo these days. But still, you could do a lot better in Indio or Thermal or Mecca So people move up there for a reason. And I think if you can develop the ownership, they'll be quite defensive of it.
That's kind of a small group. I'm talking about people in general.
In general, I'd say you make the economic argument. Take surveys at the visitor center. You might already do that just as a matter of course. What'd you come here for? Why are you here? How much money are you going to spend? How many days are you going to stay? And the business folks know how to develop economic arguments. And so you do that here. You do it in Idlewild. You can do it at the tram. And those are all the entry points. And when people realize what the economic benefit is, then they'll have ownership. They might not be concerned about the bighorn. But the bottom line influences. Well, there were several parts to that.
Well, you talked about ownership in two ways. One is kind of the emotional, Lone Ranger effect, which is a select group, a self-selecting sort of small group. And I was hoping also for how do we actually, as a grassroots movement, get the people on board to say, no, we don't want to lose our monument, or no, you may not develop on a certain trail, certain Chino cone, or whatever it might be, and that may not be your area of expertise, but it's for us who are looking to the future for how to continue the conservation question, and to be stewards. That's kind of like the technology. That's the tools that we use in order to further our goal. So I just heard two of our. One is the economic survey thing. The other one is this pure impassioned ownership.
Oh, and the third leg in that stool was what you do, the educational aspect. And your wildflower festival is growing every year, and you've just about outgrown that parking lot. So it's educational tools like that. And in the long term, you can get the kids. Every day down at Living Desert, there are busloads of kids that come in. If you can work something with them, somehow or other get that message in there. Let the kids go home and talk to mom and dad. And that's a goodly number of them are going to grow up and stay here in the valley. And they'll come to own ownership. Well, if you just look at the national park, Joshua Tree National Park, the communities of Yucca Valley and 29 Palms, Longo Valley, and I'm missing Joshua Tree. They have great ownership for that park. They're very concerned about the boundaries. Any development that takes place right along the boundaries of the park. They're very supportive of expanding the park boundaries to take back the Eagle Mine concession that came out of it. And why is that? One, it's economic, because they're gateways to the park. There's nothing in the park. You can't buy a sandwich in the park, but you can sure buy it in those communities as you go. And plus, people spend a lot of money to get a house that backs up to the park. So there's ownership, and again, you're not going to live in those communities. Well, there are some inexpensive land and such, or houses, if you've been out to Wonder Valley. But there's a reason they're up there. Again, I think it's they don't like the big city atmosphere. So they take ownership of that.
Go back a little bit. I didn't realize you were the chair of the CBMC board, or is that right?
No.
No.
Coachella Valley Mountains Conservancy, yes. For 9 years, I think it was. And one day, somebody actually read our charter.
No.
It said the chairperson had to be an elected representative
Uh-oh.
or one of the Senate appointment, or there was one other thing in there. So I was summarily dismissed.
Well, how did that...
Nobody's ever tested the legality of everything I signed.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
But,
We'll delete that part of the tape.
yeah.
So how did that start? I mean,
the Mountains Conservancy?
well, I know how we worked to help establish the Mountain Conservancy. How did you start being the chairperson? Were you the original? Or
No. I don't remember who preceded me. It could have been Buford.
Mm-hmm.
But I was the University of California, how was it in there? Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources was amended into legislation that created the Mountains Conservancy.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because Bill and Buford wanted to get me active on it. And so it was, a step down appointment that I wound up there. But we were not, I was not an active participant in actually forming the group when it started.
Right.
Interestingly enough, now that I'm leaving, the appointment still rests in Ag and Natural Resources, but there have been several revisions at office of the president, and it took several months bureaucracy to get to pass the authority from one division to another division to appoint my successor. And so now it's come down to the system-wide, the director of the system-wide NRS can make the appointment. And there's only 2 levels. You can only redelegate the appointment authority down 2 levels. So it's from the first division to the second division down to the NRS level. The bureaucratic emails that went back and forth on that were just mind-boggling.
Right.
You think it's pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
You make a phone call.
Yeah.
No, it's not the way the university works.
So do they have somebody, or is it going to be whoever takes this job? Or
it will be whoever takes this job.
Yeah.
Part of that conversation, the email was, should it be somebody local, which was the argument that I made. And nobody in office of the president in Oakland is really going to care what goes on down here.
Right.
They're not going to know intimately the properties that we're talking about,
Right.
The conservation value, et cetera. So it will come down to my successor. And we did the interviews last week. The official line is the interviews are still open, but that'll get resolved in the next couple of weeks. Can't say much about this.
Yeah. But so you would have been either the chairperson or at least on the board of CBMC through the whole
monument designation,
through the MSHCP, through all that stuff, right?
No, the MSHCP took 12 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were there.
So I was there, part of it as the chair, but I had my last meeting last Monday. So.
Who MSHCP is Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan. And was this a Bill Haber, Katie Barrow's idea that sprung up out of it seems like, like there was nothing, and then suddenly there's this organized thought about studying each habitat and, documenting through science, and there's part of me that wants to ask you about where does science play into everything,
Actually, as I said, I don't know who was the one that woke up one morning and said, "We're going to do this."
Yeah.
And who do I talk to?
You sure hope it was Bill Haber, otherwise he would have been whoever took away the 20 years of his life or whatever they took there would have been.
It was 12 years plus.
Yeah.
But that's where I think you'll get the answer to that. Yeah, it could have been Mr. Kreitz.
Mm-hmm.
It all surprised me if he put the emotion in somebody's head.
Mm-hmm. He's good at that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell me about science and this place, the role of science in conservation, and how you have nurtured this place and its people for quite a long time now.
Well, there are two different things there. One is conservation plans and science. And the other is the role of Deep Canyon Research Station in fostering science. In conservation plans, it's not enough to say the lambs are dying. And that gets you a few people, and it lasts for a little while, but you're not going to move the earth saying the lambs are dying. But if you make the argument that these creatures are apical herbivores in this landscape, that if we don't do something to conserve them and their habitat, this whole thing is going to change. And you base that on science, fundamental, basic research. And if nothing else, if you look at the basic research, say, here are the gaps. Here are the things that we don't know. And that itself generates more research. And you're still doing surveys for the multiple species. So that's what science does. It's the backbone. It's the foundation that you build the politics around. Here, the role of the Deep Canyon Desert Research Center is to provide logistics and support to enhance research and teaching. We don't have any designated research a research program like as an ag station has, for instance. All of our research and teaching, except for personal stuff, is user initiated. And if it has a conservation side to it, that's just a secondary. So all the conservation stuff we've been involved in, I'm sure OSHA doesn't appreciate that, it would just be secondary. Did they haul down a golf cart? Two already?
Yeah.
Darn, I wanted to be there to see that.
Well, you should have
Anyway.
my Jerry.
Yeah, okay. No, not that it hasn't already distracted.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah.
They're going to buy land for
They're being recycled. Yes. That took almost a month to get an account set up so that we could put it on our purchase cards. And anyway, it's here.
Good. You said you go back to we need to know what we don't know in some of these places, or that's part of the challenge, right? For science. Do you, with your experience in the Coachella Valley, do you have a feeling for what are the things that we really don't know that we should, or talk about that a little bit?
The first question you'll encounter with any conservation program, if it's specific to one particular plant or animal, well, how many of them are there?
Mm-hmm.
We still don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things we do know is if the results from our work on our study site is that, well, any year you ask that question, there's going to be a different answer.
Mm-hmm.
That the populations respond to rainfall and resources, and that they can go through extremes.
Mm-hmm.
If you really don't have a long-term perspective on how that population behaves, when one of those downfalls comes, it can be rapid and steep. And I think, my God, our efforts for naught. It's going extinct.
Mm-hmm.
And then you pull out all the stops, and you might want to transfer animals between populations or bring them into captivity, and you might do something that's totally wrong. So that's the kind of thing you got to know. And you don't know it until you have long-term studies, and those are the kinds of studies that just don't get funded.
I was going to say that's not an easy question
No,
to
they
answer.
don't fit into the normal 3 to 5 year grant cycle for academics.
Yeah.
And the kinds of surveys that the Center for Conservation Biology is doing, the only reason they're doing them is because the Conservation Commission has a mandate to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And National Science Foundation isn't going to fund those studies.
Right.
So that's what's one of the good outcomes of the multiple species plan, is just providing a means to do the basic long-term groundwork.
Mm-hmm.
It ain't sexy, it's boring.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what you really need. You also need unknown is you get into arguments about habitat quality.
Mm-hmm.
What's good habitat? What's marginal habitat? Well, when we did the fringe-tailed lizard plan, we had some notions, but you couldn't back it up scientifically.
Mm-hmm.
So what you'll find throughout that plan is the use of the term occupiable. It doesn't say they're there now.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say it's good habitat. It doesn't say it's bad habitat. But at some point in the future, it might be really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They might be there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we came to use that term.
Mm.
We know, again, without long-term studies, we would not have known what we know about transition habitat today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you're up on our study site between Indian Avenue and Indian Canyon, Gene Autry, the sand blows through there. And some years it is lizard heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And if there isn't a large amount of sand transport for running for several years, most of that stuff blows off site.
Mm-hmm.
There's residuals there, the lizards are still there.
Mm-hmm.
But, if we said habitat quality, you look at it on a poor sand year, that stuff's no good, get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you got to look at it long term, and if you can, avoid qualitative arguments.
Mm.
So stick to quantitative arguments.
If you can, yes.
Mm.
That way you can argue about the data, you can argue about how statistically it was handled.
Yeah.
But if I say, that's good habitat, and their consultant says, what do you mean that's good habitat? There's no lizards out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's bad habitat. Those are opinions.
Yeah.
And
That's an interesting statement.
you can't defend opinions. Is there a God?
Hmm.
Is my God more important, or does your God exist?
Hmm.
Those are all qualitative arguments that you can have, and you're never going to have a definitive answer. But if you have numbers, At least you can agree on the data. Okay, here's the data set. You know, well, what it means, we can argue. You know, you can do your statistics, I can do mine. We can argue about the appropriateness of various techniques, but it's a concrete thing. My opinion is not concrete.
Take me a while to figure it out now. As it applies to the world, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a.
But that's the basis of science, isn't it? Really? Is to
It's the application of science. Science, you know, the scientific method is science.
applying reason to observable.
Applying science to the world.
To the world.
You know, that's what engineers do.
Yeah.
And that's what technicians do. But science is just a pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge. I mean, was it really important that Newton figured out that everything's always going to fall down, that there's some attraction between mass? No, but you know what? Sure built a lot of bridges.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Lifted some rockets off the ground and all kinds of good
yeah,
stuff.
it keeps them off the ground.
Keeps them off the ground, right?
When we come back in a week or so and have Dr. Barrows here and some other folks and Mark, what are the kinds of things that you'd like us, that you think we should have in our discussion? I'd rather ask you now and get a kind of a, feeling for what's important.
How is it that we all came to work together?
Mm.
You know, what are the factors that brought Cam into the discussion, besides just being a manager? Yeah, Cam went on and got a PhD at Riverside, and it was based on science, fringe to lizard science. It wasn't management. Well, it has management applications, but it wasn't management applications per se that were the basis of his dissertation. How was it that we all came to work together? And how is it that Katie and Bill were able to bring in all the players to work together? How you foment a revolution?
Yeah.
This is the question.
That's
Right,
that's the question.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, because I mean, it would have been easy, I guess, for a lot of those people to, including yourself, to do their job as it was outlined. You know, the way your bosses wanted you to do it.
excuse me.
Yeah, there you go. How long have you been looking at those things, hoping that they would go to the very beyond?
Many decades.
Really?
They were salvaged. I wish I had a picture. They were salvaged from the boneyard at Living Desert. And our facilities guy at the time, Dennis Aber, he literally built all three of those carts out of parts that we salvaged and put together. And so we had one golf cart that I used, I should say my dogs used, and we let the researchers use a couple of them. And they just got to the point, those are 1950s vintage golf carts.
Gee.
Yeah, they don't even make parts for them anymore.
Yeah, Living has probably been donated by somebody.
Yeah, by people, you want a tax write off.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's how those came up there.
Well, Al, if it's any comfort to you, you'll have a picture of that on the video where
Oh.
they're going by in the background.
It's just another day at the research station.
Yeah.
Always something interesting.
Sorry for that disruption.
No, that's
Okay. It's real life.
yeah.
40 some odd days.
41.
Yeah, because it seems to me like all of the people we've talked about so far could have happily done their jobs in the way that their bosses wanted them to do it, or the way it was written originally, and it wouldn't have involved any kind of multiple species habitat conservation plan or national monument or any of this French lizard stuff. I mean, there's nothing inherent to what you do that would have caused that.
There's nothing in my job description.
Exactly. But you found a way to do it, or whatever.
We
You
had
had the-
in my case, originally it was Bill Mayhew, and he was one of those that was Bill Mayhew and Bob Stebbins, Dr. Robert Stebbins, UC Berkeley, and Dr. Bill Mayhew, UC Riverside. They got the listed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was with Bill's encouragement that I got involved and support from Bill in the biology department.
Is it in
But
the
I
job?
didn't have to do that.
Is it in the job description now?
No.
No. So it's in the person.
Yes. And like one of my stories in the interview is that towards the end of the job interview, Bill said there's this thing called the Coachella Valley Ecological Reserve Foundation. And they were set up by the Desert Protective Council to try to get habitat for the fringed-toed lizard. And I went, well, we're selling T-shirts and things. Okay, so I had a lot of T-shirts. And I said, okay, but what's involved? I said, well, you just answer a few phone calls a week. And I said, okay, but look, here's this would get me actively involved in a conservation issue. And I know UC has policy about that sort of involvement. And I don't know where the line is. Can you tell me? Mm-hmm. And he looked across the table and said, Al, don't get arrested. That was my guidance. So the rest is history. Yeah, that's what happened.
But actually, that's giving you a lot of freedom to act in that.
Oh, it is.
It's
It
really.
is. But
But
the bottom line is you can say as a herpetologist, as a scientist that works for the University of California, here are the data, A, B, C, D, and E. What you cannot say is it is the position of the University of California that fill in the blanks. Mm-hmm. That's where you get into trouble. Mm-hmm. So that may not be the arrest line, but that's the firing line.
Well, that's the quantity versus the qualified quantity.
Yeah.
Position.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Yeah. You should, during the interview, you should ask Cam, why? Mm-hmm. And what are the reasons? Mm-hmm. And I'll bet you it pretty much comes down to that same fundamental philosophical opinion that it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about this morning where so this is our second of 3 sessions, and we ran into this with Harry Quinn too, where we could do these sessions forever. There's enough information in every one of you guys has enough information in your head that'll last forever. Do you have plans to write a book or whatever in those cold, trucky winters, or what do you?
No, I don't want to work that hard.
Yeah.
Writing is not easy.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
I write well, but it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no ambition to put this down in book form. Mm-hmm. I've got data that goes back to the Wisconsin days. Mm-hmm. And that, I really like to just be a scientist for a while. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. I just have not had time to do that. I mean, that's, writing papers is not in my job description.
Right.
So, well, I could be writing. I'm taking 4 weeks to get that dumpster out there. So, anyway, but so I'll write up some of the stuff,
Mm-hmm.
the books.
Yeah. So in that case, what have we missed? I guess that you feel like if you were going to write something down, what have we not?
I think you've got the basics.
Uh-huh.
The outline. I might add a few caveats that I've learned, and the first is be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Tell people what you're going to do, and then do it.
Mm-hmm.
Never threaten.
Mm-hmm.
Always do what you say you're going to do. Listen and be willing to compromise. Because as we've noted, you're only going to lose once.
Mm-hmm.
So you're never going to get 100% of what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Had we done that on the first trench toe plan, there'd be nothing down there.
Mm-hmm.
But that ain't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some
So
good lessons.
what does compromise look like when you're talking about conservation? What is sort of the acceptable
Judgment call.
Yeah.
When we set up 3 lizard preserves, it was a guess.
Yeah.
Based on what we know about other small iguanid lizards and their territorial requirements and all those sorts of things. Will there be enough space to maintain a viable population?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, geez, we don't know. But we think this will do it. And that's just based on field experience, seat of the pants. And there was actually a survey done. It's buried in the plan somewhere, asking various herpetologists that knew something about desert lizards. How big does it have to be?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the logical but totally unhelpful comment, well, as big as you can get.
Yes, you can get it down to that way.
So you asked for 3, and did you get 3?
We got 3. And again, that was based on, not that we knew there had to be 3, but the scientific basis for asking for 3 was simply that we know small populations wink out. Just for, it can be perfect habitat, and for a number of exogenous reasons, the population just goes extinct. That happens all the time with small, isolated populations. We know that a disease could come through and wipe out a population. How you look at the desert tortoise and how the upper respiratory tract syndrome just swept through the Mojave Desert in a matter of a few years. Well, that's another good reason. And third, stuff happens. You have a catastrophic flood and you lose a preserve. So we knew we needed more than 1. 3, we knew had long-term viability. We could secure the sand source, the transport areas. So we knew that physically, these 3 areas would work. That's why we asked for 3. That's what we got.
Just for my information, where's the 3rd one? I know 2.
Well, let's go through the whole 3 for the camera. What are the 3?
The 3 are the Whitewater River Preserve between Indian Avenue and Gene Archery. Thousand Palms Reserve. Actually, it started as a preserve for because of the Nature Conservancy involvement. That's 1,400 acres, I think, somewhere in there. And then Willow Hole, which is along the fault line dunes. Willow Hole. What's the name of the mountain there?
Eden Hill?
Edom Hill.
Yeah.
Was saying that was actually the Edom Hill area was the study site for Robert Stebbins when he did his dissertation work in the 30s. and he finished in 43. So those three areas had lizards, long-term viability.
So is it the whole Edom Hill? Is Willow Hole?
I'm sorry. Edom Hill is the geographic feature that everybody knows
Right.
when they drive by on the freeway.
Yeah.
Willow Hole is a feature on the San Andreas Fault. It's a depression. It's on the northwest side of Edom Hill,
Okay.
where there's actually water and palm trees down at the bottom. And the sand blows in there, it never gets out. It starts up the hill and then falls back down. And flooding will take some ground. But so that's the three reserves, rationale
Thank you.
for that.
And the sand source, I mean, it sort of channels in different ways, but the sand source is basically the Whitewater River for all three. Is that?
The Whitewater River, obviously, from the Whitewater River Preserve. There's some controversy about the Thousand Palms Preserve. The dunes are down on 38th Street.
Right.
You know, that's where the real habitat is.
Right. Because that upper one is same, it's the same thing. Things happen. The sand went into the palms, and then the kestrels went down and got all the lizards. Right.
Yeah.
Is that the story? Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's the story across the street after Shadow Ridge.
Right. Sun City.
Some say Shadow
Yeah.
Ridge. But that's also the story of what happened on the isolated dune.
Right. That's the one I would. Yeah.
It was whenever there's an isolated dune and a palm, the dune moved close enough to the palms that the kestrels went down and picked off everything on the dune. So that's stuff happens.
Stuff
Yeah.
happens. Yeah.
Sort of got lost in the sand
The
source.
sand sources.
And then Willow Hole, I think the sand source is Mission Creek as it comes down, and there's some thought again that it was sand blew across the Whitewater River and into that area, the Willow Hole area, before the tamarisk grows along the railroad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and if you look at an aerial, you can see the linear features, the linear creosote bushes that are now on the north side of the tamarisk, and there's no sand over there.
Mm-hmm.
It's all blown away.
Mm-hmm.
And you can all see ventifacts and all that. So the one time we know it did come across,
Mm-hmm.
but that hasn't been possible since the early 60s, I think, the tamarisk went. But once sand gets there, it's not getting out.
Right.
Because it gets in this hole and tries to blow up a hill and keeps coming down.
Do you have an opinion about the bighorn sheep, how they're doing, and what the value is of the Bighorn Institute?
I have my own personal opinion, yes. When I first got here, one of the first hearings I ever went to was in Rancho Mirage. They were trying to build what's the big hotel up in the hill?
Ritz.
The Ritz.
Yes.
And I just sat there and listened. And that was the most acrimonious set of hearings I've ever been to. And neither side, I don't think, really knew what they were talking about. But that's just me. I'm not a sheep biologist. So at that point, I said, I am not getting involved in bighorn sheep issues. I got enough problems with the fringed-up lizard.
Yeah.
And I stuck to that to this day. So I have my opinions about sheep in general and about the Bighorn Research Institution specifically. And you buy me a couple of beers, I'll talk to you, but not on camera.
Yeah, we'll turn the camera off.
Kill it. So, yeah. Leave it there.
What does the time say on our ending?
11:54. You're a young guy, you don't have your phone there. to
Yeah, I set it over there so I wouldn't have to
Yeah.
look at it. Yeah. But I think we've been going for about an hour. So I think I covered what I wanted to hear. That was very good.
Mhm.
Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I guess I do. Talking out of a funny place, but it all kind of boils down to all these questions come down to some kind of love that you have. You know, that people have strong feelings about the philosophy statement. They have strong feelings about the ownership statement. They have how did this team come together because there's something here that they love. And I guess it's not a question. It's just more of an observation about how we come together to do stuff that's not on the job description. You know.
That's all true, and the reasons for that you need to talk to a sociologist, to a psychologist. But you're right. We all fundamentally love the same thing.
Yeah.